Let's start with the image that doesn't make sense. A big passenger steamer tied to a city pier tips over in front of a crowd. No iceberg, no storm, no high seas. Just a quiet morning on the Chicago River. In seconds, the ship rolls onto her side and hundreds vanish beneath the water and the iron hull. That ship was the SS Eastland. The date was July 24th, 1915. And the question people still ask, rightly, stubbornly, is the hook for our story. Why did a ship roll over while tied to the pier? Picture downtown Chicago at daybreak. The river is a narrow working corridor, bridges, warehouses, office buildings, cranes, less a postcard than a machine. It's a Saturday, summer air already warm with a low grey sky that hints at rain. At the wharf, a festive crowd gathers, workers from Western Electric's Hawthorne Works and their families, dressed for a company picnic at the beach in Indiana. Think bandboxes and bow ties, straw skimmers and shirtwaists, kids carrying lunch pails and parasols. There's laughter, jittery energy, the bustle of people who woke up early to make a boat. Eastland looks reassuring in that dockside way. Long and white, a classic Great Lakes excursion steamer, she's about to be the first of several chartered ships to depart. The gangways clack as people file aboard. Newsboys hover, vendors shout, musicians noodle with instruments. A camera tripod clicks open. A policeman tries to keep a walkway clear and fails. It has all the choreography of departure, the hurry, the crowding, the way everyone leans for a better view. If you've never been on a Great Lakes excursion day, it's a special kind of excitement. The ship feels like a park with railings. There's an impulse to go up, to reach the highest deck, to look back at the skyline and down at the water, to find the breezes. People do what people always do. They move toward the view side, the riverside, the place where a friend is waving. On Eastland, that simple human habit sets the stage. To understand what happened next, I'd like to explain a couple of quick ideas about ships. Center of gravity is the ship's balance point, where all the weight, steel, people, lifeboats adds up, like the middle of a seesaw. Stability is how strongly a ship wants to stand back up after a tilt. Designers call the snapback strength GM. Big GM pops upright fast, small GM feels wobbly. Ballast and free surface effect. Heavy weight low in the hull, often water, keeps the ship planted. But if that water can slosh in a half-full tank, like a half-full soup tray, it shifts around and reduces stability. Eastland had a reputation before 1915. She was built at the turn of the century, slim for speed and sightseeing, with a lot of her people space up high. The lakes demanded quick turnarounds and excursion steamers were optimised for short hops with maximum deck area, the better to sell tickets for scenery. Over the years, Eastland had episodes of listing, leaning noticeably, but nothing that made newspapers forgettable for long. That should have been a warning flare. When people say a ship is tender, they mean it's easy to heel over. Eastland was tender. Then came the Titanic in 1912. After that disaster, laws pushed passenger ships to carry more lifeboats and rafts, sensible on paper. But for a vessel like Eastland, adding heavy boats and davits, winch arms high on the superstructure, nudged her centre of gravity further up. That's not a moral failure, it's physics. Now back to that morning in Chicago. The company picnic means families, lots of them, thousands of people bound for a day at the lake. There's a drizzle and the wharf is slick. The first few hundred are aboard, then the next, then the decks start to fill. More keep coming because the ship is big and the gangways are still open. There is a natural drift to the riverside where the view is better. You can imagine the picture. Lines of hats along the rail, the upper decks thick with people pointing at bridges and waving down at friends still on the pier. Crew members, meanwhile, are watching the trim, the way the ship sits in the water. Eastland had ballast tanks to help manage heel and draft, but those tanks require judgment. Open this valve, close that one, pump here, drain there. It's a balancing act done in real time with the crowd moving and the river gently pushing. Above, people are still climbing to the top decks, forming clusters under the lifeboats because there's shelter there, because friends are there, because humans clump. There's a phenomenon in crowds called positive feedback. A few people go to one side, the view is better, so more people go, which proves the first people right, which draws even more. The ship doesn't care why, she just feels weight shifting aft or to port. A degree of heel shows up, just a little. Some passengers notice and joke. A kid squeals at the tilt like a carnival ride. Someone grabs a stanchion and laughs. A steward frowns. 2 minutes pass, maybe 3. The list doesn't vanish, it creeps. Crew try to correct, probably by moving water in the tanks, maybe telling people to spread out. They have done this before, and it has worked before. But the free surface effect is a silent saboteur. If any tanks are partly full, that sloshing water makes each degree of heel easier to increase. Up on the decks, the geometry is harsh. Weight high above the waterline acts like a lever arm. Every body stepping outward adds turning moment. Not much for one person, a lot for 100. Someone calls down to the engine room. Someone else looks at a gauge and swears. The gangways are still attached. The river is calm, almost offensively calm. The list nudges deeper. You can feel it as a passenger now. The world is not level and it's not bouncing back. In moments like this, everything is both slow and fast. The view tilts, coffee cups slide, a deck chair creeps, a lull in chatter replaces jokes. A mother tucks her bag under one arm and reaches for a child's hand, just in case. The band stops. The heel moves past the point where casual becomes dangerous. At a certain angle, things on tables don't merely slide, they fall. People stumble, and when they stumble, they instinctively grab for rails, which concentrates them even more where the tilt is greatest. The ship's righting ability shrinks as the centre of gravity inches outward, and now the smallest push, the wake from a passing tug, the movement of 100 bodies, increases the angle, which causes more sliding and grabbing, which adds more weight to the low side. That's the feedback loop at work on steel and humanity. Then it happens. The ship goes, decisively. The roll picks up speed past an invisible threshold. A hush rushes into a roar. Crockery shatters, luggage clatters, a chorus of shouts snaps into a scream. Eastland swings to port like a barn door falling off its hinge and keeps going until she lies on her side. A white cliff suddenly horizontal in the river, her funnels and masts slashing the air, her hull thudding against the riverbed. It takes seconds, not minutes, seconds. The crowd on the pier sees it as a magic trick gone wrong. One moment a festive deck stacked with people, the next a steel wall blotting the sky, and then the unreal quiet after impact, and then the sound of people in water. Inside the ship, physics turns into terror. Passages become shafts, floors become walls. Those on open decks are hurled into the river or onto the side of the hull. Those below, especially in enclosed spaces with few windows, are suddenly in a maze with no up. The portholes, the round windows, are on what is now the roof. Water pours in wherever an opening exists. Furniture becomes battering rams. Stairways are now vertical ladders slicked with river. Light is patchy. For many there's darkness. People call out names that vanish into the grinding of metal and wood, and yet, because the river is shallow here, the ship doesn't vanish beneath the surface. She lies on her beam ends in water that is not deep enough to bury her completely. That saves some and traps others. The hull becomes both coffin and platform. People who make it out cling to anything that floats. Broken chairs, crates, the ship's own fittings. Others scramble onto the upturned side, fingernails catching on rivet heads. Mothers push children upward through windows that moments earlier framed the river view. A teenage boy wiggles through a round window and then turns to haul a stranger by the wrists. Lives hinge on inches and timing. On the pier and the bridges, the bystanders become rescuers. Longshoremen toss ropes and planks. Police and firefighters sprint and begin to pry at openings. A tugboat edges in, crew throwing lines and then jumping across to the steel hull to hack at vents. Warehouse workers bring ladders. A photographer forgets his camera and becomes a stretcher bearer. Divers, some trained, some just the bravest men who can hold their breath, drop into the murk and feel their way along. You hear axes on steel, then the rattle of drills. Rescuers cut, pry, hammer. Here and there a panel gives, and a square of light appears in a black world, and a hand reaches through, then another. Rivers are indifferent to heroism. The water is cold, the visibility near zero. Inside the ship's compartments, the air turns sour. Time matters in the worst way, every minute adding weight to the tally not yet known. Outside, the scene is organised chaos. Ambulances, wagons, private cars, all pressed into service. If this were a stage, you'd see lines of people handing out blankets and coffee, and then other lines carrying sheets that don't move. In factory towns, tragedies ripple like dropped stones. Word runs through neighbourhoods. Eastland has gone over. Mothers drag on coats and run to the river. Husbands sprint from streetcars. The city hums with a new kind of sound, the noise of disbelieving urgency. By midday, the rough outlines of the disaster are clear. The numbers are rumour-heavy but always grim. A missing poster for a family of 4 shares a lamppost with another for a pair of sweethearts. Rescue becomes recovery, slowly, painfully. A makeshift morgue is set up at an armoury. The line of people hoping not to recognise someone stretches past the entrance, then around a corner. Trains keep arriving at stations with picnic-goers who never boarded Eastland, and for a moment those platforms are scenes of relief, followed by the guilt that relief always brings. If a disaster is a question shouted into the air, the investigation is the long attempt at an answer. Why did Eastland roll while tied to the pier? In the aftermath, there are hearings, experts, dueling explanations that boil down to a few crucial interlocking truths. First, the ship's stability was marginal. Stability is not a single switch. It's a curve that describes how much righting arm, righting leverage, a vessel has as it tilts through angles. Eastland's curve was stingy. She had never been a happy roller. Her design placed much of her passenger space high, and her hull form didn't forgive top-heavy loading. Over years, accounts accumulated of Eastland leaning alarmingly during embarkations. That history matters. Ships remember what they've done through the stories of those who sail them. Second, the modifications after Titanic, more lifeboats, more rafts, more davits, added significant weight high up. This moved the centre of gravity upward, trimming the safety margin on that righting curve. Laws meant to save lives can clash with the specifics of a hull. It's not a contradiction to say that lifeboats are good, while also saying that putting a lot of new weight on top of an already tender ship is bad. Both can be true. For Eastland, it pushed her closer to the edge. Third, management of ballast and the free surface effect likely played a role. Water in tanks stabilises when it's full and locked. It destabilises when it sloshes. If the crew trying to correct a slight list adjusted ballast with partially filled tanks, they could unintentionally have made the situation worse by adding sloshing mass that followed the heel. Combine that with the live load of thousands of people moving as a crowd, and the ship becomes a system teetering on a narrow ridge. Finally, human behaviour, the most predictable force in the world, did what it always does. People moved toward the rail for the view. People clustered under covers when the sky threatened rain. Families stuck together, clumping weight in pockets. No one did anything wrong in a moral sense. They did what anyone would do on a happy morning boarding for a picnic. All of those elements, design, modification, operation, behaviour, wove into a catastrophe that struck in seconds. And because the ship never left the city stage, because the river was a public place, the horror played out in front of thousands. That's one reason Eastland isn't easily forgotten by those who know Chicago history. Tragedy is often remote, but this one happened in the civic living room. In the weeks after, blame looked for targets. The captain and some officers were charged, so were company officials. In the public imagination, it's natural to point at a person. But the legal cases, after grinding through courts, ended without the kind of convictions that settle the matter. The more uncomfortable truth settled in. A system had failed. Inspectors had passed a ship whose margins were thin. Owners had pushed capacity. Regulators had layered new requirements without fully considering how a specific hull would bear them. Everyone had assumed that what worked yesterday would work today. Numbers arrived, more precise than rumours and worse to read. 844 dead. It's a number that hides people, so it's worth pausing to imagine them without names. A foreman with a second-hand watch he wound twice a day. A young woman proud of a new hat. Two brothers still small enough to be told apart by their caps. The quiet friend who always remembered to bring the matches. A mother with a folded letter in her purse. A city doesn't just lose numbers, it loses futures. The neighbourhoods around the Hawthorne Works feel that subtraction for years in the empty chairs at dinner. And the ship? The Eastland was righted and raised. Steel is valuable, even when it has been a tomb. She would be stripped, repurposed, given a new name and a new life as a naval training vessel on the same waters that had betrayed and sustained her. There's a melancholy practicality to that. The lakes are full of ghosts. The living keep using what they can. There's a kind of survivor's knowledge that emerges after any disaster. People who were there learn what their lives are made of. A woman who crawled through a window carries a small scar she can hide with a bracelet. On certain days it tingles and she is back in the dark, counting her breaths. A man who dove under the hull and pulled out two strangers has a way of staring into the middle distance at supper. A boy who lost his father grows up too quickly and tells his own son to always look for the exit. What should we take from the Eastland if we're listening more than a century later? First, that safety is a system, not a checklist. It's not enough to say more lifeboats or more of anything. You have to ask where the weight goes, how people move, how the whole design behaves when something unexpected happens. Every additional safety measure changes the machine it's meant to protect. Engineers know this, but disasters are the cruel reminders the rest of us remember. Second, that crowd dynamics are physics wearing human faces. A ship doesn't care that a family wants to stand together at the rail, but design should. Wide stairs, clear signage, crew training to disperse clusters. These are the unglamorous decisions that turn instinct into safety. If you've ever been in a stadium where everyone pressed toward one exit, you've felt how architecture can shape risk. A ship is moving architecture. Third, that history leaves fingerprints. Eastland's earlier brushes with ugly lists were warnings. When a machine whispers that it's near its limits, believe it. The miracle of industrial life, boats, trains, factories, is that so much goes right so often. The trap is that the very reliability dulls our attention until something fails spectacularly. Let's go back one more time to the moment before Eastland rolled, because that's where the hook of our story lives. Why did a ship roll while tied to the pier? Because a dozen little truths met at once. A design with thin margins, extra weight where a hull didn't want it, tanks that may have sloshed when they needed to be still, a crowd doing what crowds do, a calm river that felt like safety, a culture of, we've done this before and it was fine. Most disasters aren't a single mistake. They're a stack of almosts that add up to a too much. That's the Eastland story. It doesn't end with a courtroom verdict or a final lesson carved in stone. It ends with us every time we decide where to put weight, literal or figurative. Every time we check the balance of something that looks fine because it has always looked fine. And it ends with a promise that seems simple but isn't, to remember. Not only the number, but the mechanics, the choices, the people. The mother at the porthole, the boy pulled through, the dock workers' calloused hands, the rivets that held fast even as everything else gave way. When you ask, why did a ship roll over while tied to the pier? The answer is both an explanation and a warning. Ships float because physics allows them to. They capsize when physics wins. Between those two facts lies design, judgment, and the human impulse to climb a little higher for a better view. On July 24, 1915, in a city river that looks tame, the balance tipped, and a whole city learned the hardest way that quiet water can hide very loud truths.